Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Joe here with me, my co-host Dan,
Hello and greetings.
and welcome to our new podcast series here on the Sci-Fi Corner. Been a while since we updated this channel. Mostly we did superhero nonsense and critiques, many of which were not well received because they were outside opinions rather than the sort that you're supposed to have. But we figured, given that this is sci-fi, why not do something with, honestly, probably the best sci-fi movie of the 80s, Transformers. And this 1986 movie was a animation masterpiece with great art, great animation, and this is coming from someone who doesn't care for sci-fi. Hey, I'm going to be honest, though it's the sci-fi corner, I'm more a fantasy guy. But Transformers 1986, I remember loving it as a kid, and it's always had a special place in my heart. Remember, we used to always rent it and it annoyed our mother? We also found it too violent, which it was during the Christian mother phase of the 90s, and she went for a phase. Our dad, for his part, was more annoyed about the money wasted on constantly renting it and felt, just buy the damn thing. That said, the movie is one with a bit of an interesting background to it, as in real life, it was little more than a toy commercial, and the cartoon itself was a toy commercial. As to the in universe backstory, eons ago, I don't know how many eras ago, Unicron and his brother, at least I think they were brothers, Primus, fought, and Unicron slew the other guy. Primus's body, I believe, was to become Cybertron, but his heart, his soul, really, became the matrix of leadership. And a prophecy was spelled out that the matrix would one day destroy Unicron and that it would light the darkest hour and that all would become one, so to speak. The prophecy itself would cause a great deal of consternation for Unicron, who for a time, I think, kind of just didn't care. And then as the eons progressed, he began to grow more afraid as he sensed somewhere out there the power of Primus. That said, let's be honest, the current wielder was an Optimus Prime, but Prime, the trouble was, could never quite wield the full power of the Matrix. Let's be honest, he wasn't really the chosen one. He was just a placeholder, both as a leader and wielder of the Matrix of leadership. And the thing is, this was something that Unicron well knew. So at the start, while he's looking for the Matrix, he's not quite in the hit the red panic button, emergency, emergency, emergency mode. Rather, he's doing his usual thing of going around devouring planets after traveling through a sun, like literally traveling just straight through it, with nary a dent on his enormous planet-sized body.
Galactus has nothing on this guy.
No, no. But Unicron is essentially supposed to be the Transformers' devil. And throughout the movie, he plays more of a role akin to the snake in the garden, corrupting and whispering to various characters, primarily Megatron / Galvatron, corrupting him all the more. Whereas in other depictions, he's not quite as intimidating or fearsome, and he's never quite as well portrayed. But in this movie, he's a terrifying force of nature, and very well played by Orson Welles. That said, in his first appearance, we see him in the prologue to the movie, as mentioned, devouring a world. And this is also the first time we see the robotic children of Cybertronian-style people, who are obviously not Cybertronians, but distant relatives of sorts. Somewhere along the evolutionary line, they took a different route. But they obviously have kids. And this brings this sharpens the tragedy that hits this planet as all those kids you see in the opening scene die. So obviously they were taking this movie into a very dark place. Another quick note about this movie. It takes the Transformers universe in a darker direction in regards to the Great War between the Autobots and Decepticons. In the cartoon from the 80s before this movie, the Autobots never lost a single battle. And honestly, Megatron and Starscream were more like Jesse and James from Pokemon. They were a complete joke, them and the rest of the Decepticons. You pointed and laughed. Actually, your little pet poodle could probably take them on, and the two of them would run along with the rest of the Decepticons, and you'd have Starscream screaming, "Megatron has fallen!" And Megatron would, of course, beat up Starscream, keep retreating or blasting off once again. This movie takes a different spin on the characters, as the idea was that in the interim between 1984/85 in universe and 2005, at some point, Megatron finally managed to, well, obviously after linking up with the Decepticons on Cybertron, which, let's just be honest, he did do in the series, but he was able to outmaneuver Optimus. Finally, we could see him as a competent villain, something he had never been before. And what Megatron did was took back all of Cybertron, banishing the Autobots to one of the moons of Cybertron, and also wiped out, it seems, a great chunk of the human race. And I only posit that because when we do see Earth later, it has very few humans left, and we don't see any humans outside of, Spike and his kid. I don't know why I said Danny. And his son, Danny. So we know that Spike's wife is still alive. So I would only posit that maybe there was a cataclysmic event where Megatron probably took the war to humanity and wiped out most cities and civilization. And all that's left are a few Autobot cities on the planet where humans are guarded and protected by the Autobots. So strategically, one has to guess that Optimus was faced with the ultimate choice: trying to save the Earth and its people, or trying to save Cybertron. But here's the problem. He failed. He tried to rescue the humans, didn't fully succeed. Maybe a few thousand or a few million survived. Probably a few million. And we know in Beast Wars that the location of Earth has been scrapped from the records, which suggests that there was such a massive genocide committed against humanity, and this in spite of the fact that humanity helped fight off and win the Great War, that the Autobots felt it necessary to remove the location of Earth from all star maps to let humanity start to regain its footing on Earth and to protect it. In turn, for Cybertron, what it meant was that Optimus had lost Cybertron, where he originally had at least half the planet. Now he had nothing. So, in that regard, as a backstory to this movie, it's obvious that Optimus has failed as a leader in the backstory, sadly. This is not to say that he was a terrible leader or general, just that he had chosen his heart over this strategic victory. And even then, Megatron had outmaneuvered him. So this takes the continuous slapstick victories of the 80s and turns them on their head, so that those slapstick victories meant nothing. And in the end, Megatron ended up turning the war on its head, and Optimus was left with nothing. In turn, though, you had a young Autobot by the name of Hot Rod who was brought to Earth, and he was essentially a intern in Autobot City, a fortress city by the sea over on Earth, and he became friends with Spike's son, serving as a bit of a older brother slash nanny of sorts. which was probably meant to keep Hot Rod out of trouble. But let's be honest, Hot Rod has a adventure and trouble-seeking streak and tends to attract trouble like no other character in all of Transformers history. I've seen Hot Rod compared to Cheetor. I don't agree with this comparison. This is a very inept comparison, I would argue. And the reason I think it's inept and it's not quite accurate, I get it, but I don't agree with it.
It's surface level.
Yeah, Cheetor was always intended to basically be the baby brother. And he's never to rise above that role. That is Cheetor's archetype and character. Whereas Hot Rod is to serve more of a Luke Skywalker type role. And I know that's quite on the nose given the 80s and sci-fi. But Hot Rod is also to serve a very different archetype. He's the chosen one, really. He's starting off the story, the chosen one archetype, and has to build his way up to being the king archetype, so to speak. It is him who's going to lead the Autobots into the future. And this is why I also don't agree with Optimus Prime's revival and think that was the dumbest idea ever, because Prime's time was over. Rodimus's time was now. But that aside, the overall setting is a very bleak one at the start of this movie. You see a planet destroyed. You see that Optimus has lost Cybertron. Then you'll see that he's lost Earth to an extent. Well, he still has it, but the human population just isn't what it once was. And the scary part is that the Earth seems barren. There's countryside, lots of it, that's good. But it's barren of cities and people, which suggests that though humanity now has some Cybertronian tech in the year 2005, at what cost did it come? Yeah, it's a very bleak setting, but it offers a lot of storytelling opportunities that the original series didn't. And we're going to see as we go through this podcast about this movie just what opportunities the writers took as they take, for the first time in Transformers history, risks. Of course, they'd stop doing that right after this movie, and then they'd start again with Beast Wars. Then they decide to basically nuke the bed, so to speak, with the most dreadful series of the 90s, Beast Machines. But we're not going to talk about the greatest war crime against everyone of the 90s. I'm joking. Actually, let's be honest, that was a terrible series. I still consider it the worst series I've ever seen in my life.
I agree. And we've seen some bad ones.
Yeah. So, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were Hot Rod taking down one of his enemies.